All right, let's talk about how to write equations given an exponential graph. Remember that our equation for an exponential graph is going to be y equals a times b to the x. A is our y-intercept. So if you recall, that is where our line crosses our y-axis. B is going to be our growth or decay, depending on what type of graph we're looking at, factor. So our y-intercept is where we start. Our b is how we're getting from one y value to the next. So in this equation, or in this graph right here, we can see that our graph crosses the y-axis, our exponential graph crosses the y-axis at 0, 4. So a, our y-intercept, is 4. Now to get b, our growth factor, since this is exponential growth, we want to look at 2 points that have consecutive x values. So here we have 0 and 1. Those are back to back, those are consecutive. So we're going to use these 2 points to determine b. What we're going to do is we're going to look at what is the factor used to get from this first y value to the second y value. So to get from 4 to 8, the factor that we use is a product of, or multiplying by 2. So b in this case is 2. Once we have those two values, then all we need to do is substitute them into our equation. So instead of a, we're going to write 4, and instead of b, we're going to write 2. So our exponential function for this graph is y equals 4 times 2 to the x. Let's look at the next graph that we have here. So again, the equation that we're going to write is y equals a times b to the x. A, again, is our y-intercept, and b is our growth factor for this one. Our y-intercept is 3, since our graph crosses the y-axis at 3. Now, on this one, we do have consecutive points of 0 and 1. We want those, so we're going to use those 2 points. But to get from 3 to 4.5, it's not as easy to identify that factor. So when we encounter problems like this, a formula that we can use to figure out our b is to use the formula y2 divided by y1. So essentially you're taking the second y value, which in this case is 4.5, dividing it by the first y value, which in this case is 3, and that's going to give you the factor used to get from 3 to 4.5, which in this case would be 1.5. When we divide 4.5 divided by 3, we would get 1.5. So when we go to write this equation, it's going to be y equals a, no, not a, my bad, y equals 3 times 1.5, I'll put that in parentheses, to the x. Or you might also see it written in fraction form, so that would be 3 times 3 over 2 to the x. Let's look at one more example. So when we have a graph that is exponential decay, the process is going to be the same. So we are looking at the same equation, y equals a times b to the x. We're still going to need to figure out our y-intercept. In this case, and this time we're going to need to look for our decay factor. Our y-intercept is 6, since that's where it crosses the y-axis. To get from, again, to find our decay factor, we need 2 consecutive x value points. So 0 and 1 are consecutive. Those will work for us. And we're looking to see how do we get from 6 to 2. So in this case, you might see that to get from 6 to 2, that's dividing by 3. However, what we need is a factor, since b is our decay factor. So we could convert dividing by 3 to multiplying by 1/3, since those two things are the same. So b in this case would be 1/3. If you're not able to see that, or if we encounter a problem like we did before, remember that we could always use the formula y2 divided by y1. Be careful on this one, because our second y value in this problem is 2. Our first one is 6. So be careful not to make the mistake of always putting the larger number on top. We always want to make sure that we're taking the second point, putting it on top. The first point goes on the bottom. 2 divided by 6, or 2 over 6, is the same thing as 1/3, which is what we got a while ago. And then when we would go to write this equation, it would be y equals 6 times 1/3 to the x. And that, my friends, is how we write an equation in exponential form from a graph.